Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello, you are listening to Czechast and I am Vít Pohanka, your host. I'm back after a brief pause because I was too busy with other projects, but I will do my best to be here on Czechast again with a new story ready for hopefully every weekend. If you read about Czech history, you may know that this October marks the 600th anniversary of the death of Jan Žižka, the great Czech military leader and radical Hussite who spread this early attempt at church reform by sword and fire. As a matter of fact, he died very close to my hometown of Žďár nad Sázavou on the Bohemian-Moravian border. He passed away near the town of Přibyslav, most likely from quite a horrid skin disease called carbuncle. With all due respect, however, Jan Žižka, though highly significant, was a follower of the teaching of Jan Hus, the Czech theologian, philosopher and Charles University professor. And it's not just me who thinks that Jan Hus was much more important. He was undoubtedly one of the most prominent figures the Czech nation gave to the world. Born around 1370, probably in South Bohemia, he studied and later taught at Charles University in Prague. His call for reform of the Catholic Church anticipated the Lutheran Reformation by a whole century, leading first to his excommunication and then, in 1415, his imprisonment and sentencing to death by burning at the stake at the Council of Constance in Germany. And it was in this great historical city on the shores of the Lake Constance, known to the Germans as Bodensee, that I recently visited the house where Jan Hus allegedly spent some time before his imprisonment. The house is now a museum dedicated to his life, teachings and the significance he still holds, not just for Czech history, but for the Western world's way of thinking. And as I walked through the museum, I had a very knowledgeable guide, the director of the Hus House, as the locals call it.
Symbolic, to be honest. Yeah, we are here in a place where we're not quite sure whether Jan Hus lived here. My name is Alexander Pöschel. I am a historian. I studied here at the University of Constance for my master's degree, history with a special focus on medieval history. And yeah, I started working last year in September here for the Hus Museum, and for me it was a little bit unexpected, let's say it like this. I did not know that Jan Hus is such an important historic figure when I started working here. I have to confess I did not know that there's a national holiday on the 6th of July in the Czech Republic. I would not have dreamed that during summertime families with small children would come here, because we present here the history of two medieval intellectuals who came here, who wanted to contribute discussing church reform. So it's about medieval theology, and it's a very sad history to academics who got burned alive, so that families with small children would come here. That was unexpected, but in a pleasant way.
Would you remember the first time that you heard about Jan Hus?
I came here to Constance in 2017, and during that time the 600th anniversary of the Council of Constance took still place, so it was for 4 years. And yeah, during a city tour here with a local guide, we also came by here, and he introduced us to the history of the house and to the name Jan Hus.
So maybe this is a good point where you can kind of show me around your exhibition and how you kind of present the story of Jan Hus. But I suppose that you also deal a little bit with his legacy and his significance as a thinker.
Yeah, to be honest, when I am giving tours here through the house, I usually start at the outside and start with the legacy.
So let's go there.
Okay, let's go.
So so
right
we're
now,
outside.
yes. We are standing at the outside of the museum, and you
see
can
a plaque,
see,
yeah,
you can see an inscription, and it is written in two languages, both Czech and German. And you can see it was dedicated by Czech countrymen in the year 1878. And that is peculiar because around the same time this street here was renamed to Hus Street, in German Hussenstraße. We have a quote by a local historian, Ludwig Leiner, who was responsible for establishing the city collection, and he was arguing in favor of renaming this street here to Hus Street in the 1870s, because he wrote that already in the 1870s lots of Czech people were coming to this house to commemorate Jan Hus. He speaks explicitly of something like a pilgrimage. As you can imagine, during the time when Jan Hus was here walking along, it was not called Hus Street, it was called St. Paul's Street. But in the second half of the 19th century, they wanted to get rid of the medieval city name, of the medieval street names, and thus he was arguing in favor of renaming the street to Hus Street.
Okay, so what was in the house when people started coming here for a kind of pilgrimage in the 19th century?
To be honest, it changed significantly over time. For example, when we are right now walking again through the door, I can show you some images, maybe right now or maybe later, where you can see that there was a window. So we know in the 19th century and start of the 20th century, there was, for example, a bakery here. Let's you can see, there are two windows.
There were just two windows. I mean, there was no entry. So the entrance was at the back somewhere.
So it must have been here to the side.
To the side of it.
Yeah, actually, this house here, it is a combination of two medieval buildings that I have to say. They were joined together in the 19th century when they started with the modern city enumeration, where both complexes became street name number 64. So and it was privately owned, So, and there used to be a bakery in the 20th century here.
So when people would come, I mean, they would just see the house from the outside, buy some bakeries, I suppose, and then, think about Jan Hus and then leave, right? You don't know.
Yeah, I guess so. So there was a company here in the oldest images we have are, let me check here. So you can see here the name St. Gabele. So there must have been some craftsmen here. Yeah, a lot of it is symbolic. We are presenting here the history of two church reformers.
Yes, there were actually two Czech reformers and thinkers who were sentenced to death at the Council of Constance. Besides Jan Hus, his most prominent pupil, Jerome of Prague, was burnt at the stake nearly a year after his mentor. It is also true that the main aim of the council, which held deliberations for more than 3 years, was to end the Western schism of the Christian Church when it had not one, but two, and for a time even 3 popes. However, it is arguably the inspirational, though ultimately tragic, fate of Jan Hus that is most closely associated with the events in Constance more than 6 centuries ago.
You were asking why he came to this house, and the state of Czechoslovakia, more precisely people from the finance industry, they bought this house. So you saw the inscription from the 1870s, and we know that there was significant interest from Czech people in this building, because for them that was part of the history of Jan Hus, that Jan Hus lived here during the brief period when he was still free here in Constance. But actually, even in the 1920s, when this house was bought and then granted to the state of Czechoslovakia, there were some doubts that Jan Hus actually lived in this building. Yeah, if you have here just a brief look around, and maybe the listeners will also see some photographies in your on your website, you can see it's a very old building.
Yes.
So we have very low ceilings. We have timberwood architecture, very, very old wooden beams. All the walls, there are some dents, so nothing is straight. You can really realize that this is a house with...
this is authentic. I mean, this is really medieval, right? I mean, the walls,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And I think this contributed to why people thought
that
Jan Hus lived here, yeah. But there were some doubts. For example, I told you before that this is actually a combination of two medieval houses. So you can see on both sides here the old walls. And yeah, in the medieval chronicles it is told that when Jan Hus was here in Kostnitz and he was free, 200 people came to listen to his sermons.
So how
would 200 people fit in here? Yeah, it would become very
small,
closely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this afternoon a school group, I think of around 40 Czech pupils will come here, and usually we have to divide the groups in two, because if it's more than 20 to 25 pupils, then it's difficult to handle. Yeah, and yeah, once we had a group of 40 pupils here all at once, and they were afraid that the walls here would collapse, the floor would collapse. So yes, and further evidence why we are doubtful whether Jan Hus lived here is he writes in one of his letters to his friends in Prague that he lived within the site of the Pope's residence. And the Pope's residence during the time of the council, that was the bishop's place, which is very close to the main cathedral. And I can show you here a historic map, and if you want to, I can also later send it to you. So we are here very close to this old gate, which you saw to the right, the so-called Schnetztor. And yeah, this is a city map from the year 1601, so almost 200 years after the death of Jan Hus. And here you can see the street where we are right now, so lots of small buildings where during the time of the council, craftsmen were living. And this street makes a corner. And it is simply not possible to look from here to the main cathedral. And you see this building here adjacent of the Pope's. Yeah, it is. What does it mean to be within the site of the Pope's residence? So that is doubtful. But what is also a very good evidence is that we have the tax records from 1418 onwards. And we know the name of the landlord of Jan Hus. It was a young widow called Vida Pfister. She owned some gastronomy. She had to make a living to provide for her family because she was unfortunately a young widow. And a local historian called Gernot Blechner, he has traced her gastronomy in another house further down the road. Nowadays in the it is the building Hus Street number 22, which is a much wider building, so a lot more place to accommodate, for example, 200 listeners for Jan Hus. It is further down the road, and thus it is more plausible that Jan Hus could see from there to the main cathedral. Yeah, but it is...
But I suppose, it's about the importance of the symbol,
Yes.
Perhaps it wasn't this house, but Jan Hus was definitely here in Kostnice, in Constance. So, there it is, right?
And it's the thought that counts. For example, if you look here to the right, we see a bust of Jan Hus. It is by the sculptor Ladislav Šalun. We have here a cooperation with the Hussites Museum in Tabor. So here for the main exhibition, the Hussites Museum in Tabor is responsible. This year we were celebrating our 40th anniversary of the city partnership. So there's lots of cooperation going on, and the tradition is still kept alive. And you know this depiction of Jan Hus, you know it from Prague, of course, from one of the main places. But that is...
Czech historians say actually that he was probably quite plump. He was not exactly fat, but he was
Really?
plumper. Yeah. That's what historians say, and he actually mentioned it himself. I think sometimes, but it doesn't matter. Again, it's about the symbolic look, of an ascetic kind of thinker,
To be honest, what I was learning when I was sifting through the literature, for example, by Pavel Sukhov, who is the Center of Medieval Studies, to my knowledge, we did not know how Jan Hus looked like. We have no contemporary depictions of him. The oldest surviving depictions we have date back from the 1460s. To my knowledge, they are from the so-called Riechenthal Chronik. And I can show you maybe
1460s, that would be like
5 decades after his burning. And if you look at here, there's not much what you can recognize here from his physiognomy. Yeah, and all these depictions, they differ from manuscript to manuscript, so there are different manuscripts portraying Jan Hus. What is important, for example, that he's depicted as a heretic. Here you can see the inscription heresiarcha, meaning arch heretic, and yeah, here you can see a depiction with which you are familiar of Jan Hus. Yeah, so he has long hair, a long beard, very thin cheek, very ascetic. In many ways, he reminds of a philosopher. But yeah, there's a tradition to which this depiction goes back. You familiar?
Again, I think it's about the symbol. You know?
Yes, yeah, but this depiction is shaped by the Reformators. So we have now to go back a little bit. Right. And here you can see a wood carving from the first half of the 16th century. And yeah, here you can see Jan Hus being portrayed in a similar fashion. So long hair, long beard. Here's the theologian hat. He's very, very thin. And what I think is he also looks quite old for someone who we think was around 45 years old when he was burned at the stake. But he is portrayed as an intellectual with the academic code, with the scripture in his hand. And I think this was some kind of role model for later depictions, that he's very thin, that he's like a philosopher, but this is just an artistic conception. What people within the Reformation movement later thought Jan Hus looked like.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
So,
a lot of it is really symbolic, to be honest. Yeah, we are here in a place where we're not quite sure whether Jan Hus lived here, and we show lots of images of Jan Hus, but we're also not sure how he looked like.
I traveled all the distance from Prague to Constance yesterday, of course by car, on motorways, speeding down. But, I just thought back in the Middle Ages, back in the early 15th century, what kind of journey would it be from the castle of Krakovec, which is west of Prague, where Hus actually started his journey? So what do we know? It is presented here, right?
Yes, so we have lots of letters from Jan Hus, and thus we are able to reconstruct his journey here. So, Jan Hus, he did not know what to expect when he comes here, because he was like excommunicated. So, he was should be regarded like a social outcast. People were actually not allowed to talk to him, to offer him food, to offer him accommodation. So he did not know what to expect him when he comes here to Constance. So he was not traveling alone. I think he was traveling in a group of 5. So there was a knight who was responsible for his safety, but there were also some academics from the University of Prague who should help him here defending himself. So here it is written around 30 horses and with 2 carriages. So mobility was definitely something else. And it is written here around 600 kilometers. It took him 24 days, so around 25 kilometers per day. He started traveling in October, so already right now the sun is shining, but of course,
it was in autumn, and the days are shorter as well.
The days are shorter, of course. No artificial light, and so
what a journey. So he
must
went.
Have been very
are these what we see on the map? Some of the lines are kind of dotted, and some of them are kind of in full line. So this is where we have some hesitation to know exactly where he went.
Exactly, yes. So these we don't know for sure. These are some theories.
Sure. He might have visited Pilsen, Stříbro, Tachov in Western Bohemia, but maybe also Plana, Přimda. But he definitely crossed the border to Bavaria and Barnau.
Yes, so that we know for sure. And these here are all places we know that he passed by.
Among others, there's Nuremberg.
Nuremberg, and Nuremberg, Nuremberg was a very important city at that time, and
then again,
if we go here, you can see a local depiction also by the Schädelsche Weltchronik, and from the 1490s. And Jan Hus writes that he was in contact with some clerics there. And he was really relieved to hear that some of them said to him that what you're teaching is orthodox, that is right. So he did not know what to expect him when he was passing here through German cities. I always get a little bit nostalgic when I walk here along because this here is my hometown.
I see.
Weissenburg, yeah.
Weissenburg, yeah.
Yeah, so this is where I grew up, but I also have to confess to you, we have now, we have a statue of Martin Luther, but
not of Jan Hus.
Yeah, his history is not told in our history courses, unfortunately. Yeah, if you
Just for the listeners to explain, I mean, what we have here is a kind of improvised map with some dates where we definitely know that he sent his letter or he made some mentions. He passed through cities.
On this day.
And it's on the floor, so you can literally follow it.
For example, here you can see that he was kind of enthusiastic when he arrived here at the city of Constance. He writes, "Know that I have never traveled under cover of my hood," so he did not have to hide his personality, what he was thought, but openly with my face uncovered. I have not noticed any enemies so far. So
So just to sum it up, he didn't know what to expect, but then he was kind of pleasantly surprised when passing through.
I must confess that there's no greater hostility against me than that of the inhabitants of Bohemia. So, but
he was relieved of this.
So he knew that he was someone who had polarized people before. And here we have an excerpt from the guarantee safe passage that King Sigismund gave him. So he reached Constance at the start of November, so even before the Council of Constance had started. Yeah.
So he was here on the 3rd of November 1414. He arrived here to Constance. Yeah.
And I think he must have been at first very tired when he came here, to be honest, because it was 25 days traveling on horse.
You are listening to Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Today with Alexander Perschel, director of the Jan Hus Museum in Constance, Germany. Let's imagine the setting. Jan Hus was invited to Constance in 1414 to present his views on the dissension within the church. He was promised safe conduct not only by the Hungarian and German king Sigismund, who was the brother of the Czech king Wenceslaus IV and harbored ambitions of becoming Holy Roman Emperor. Hus was also assured that he was safe by one of the competing popes who was present at the council. It is this sense of betrayal, along with Jan Hus's bravery and his willingness to die for his ideas rather than to renounce them, that the museum in Constance explains through physical exhibits, images, and interactive screens. Because it's important, let me just read it. Jan Hus, this is what Pope John the 23rd said, "Jan Hus is absolutely safe in Constance and no steps shall be taken against him, even if he were to kill my brother. I suspend the validity of the church punishments which were brought against him, but I only ask that he does not attend solemn conciliar masses and congregations to avoid causing public offense." So he didn't want him to kind of explain to the people, to the masses, his teachings, basically.
Yeah, and what I also find remarkable is here in one of his letters when he writes why he had to come here to Constance. "I'm going to join my enemies, but I'm forced to make this journey to defend my truth against false censure." So he knew that here some people would await him, which he regarded as his enemies, that it could become dangerous. "If conviction and death awaits me, do not believe the verdict that I am heretic." But why should I not suffer if he too suffered? And if
meaning Jesus Christ.
Yes, of course. But I find it really remarkable that he writes, "I have to defend my truth against false censure." So that must have been his motivation. Yeah.
So when did it? Sorry. Go ahead.
If Jan Hus lived here in this building, it would have been only for a very brief time. So here you can see he arrived in the 3rd of November, and I think for a certain time at first he needed to relax and gain some forces again. But after
recuperate.
After around 3 to 4 weeks, he was then summoned to come to speak to the cardinals. And Jan Hus, he was doubtful. He knew that this could be a trap, he writes. "I did not just come because of the cardinals, and I never requested to speak to them in private. But I am willing to come at the summons of the cardinals and be questioned. And I am willing to choose death rather than deny any truth taught in the scriptures. So he knew, it could be dangerous, so this was a trap. He wanted to speak in front of the entire council, as King Sigismund had assured him to. But from then onwards, unfortunately, he was trapped in the first prison where he spent a longer time was here at the former Dominican monastery, very close to the seaside, and this building still exists nowadays. Contrary to Jan Hus' time, for him it was a very harsh prison. Nowadays it's a luxury hotel, the fanciest one in town. And it's also open to the public. So, and there's the tradition, one of the round buildings on the outside, it's called the Hus Tower. Mm-hmm. But we don't know whether he stayed in the so-called Hus Tower. It's a tradition that goes back to the 19th century. So in the 19th century, when this was no longer a monastery, they found a wooden cage. And here you can see a very old door. It's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
a
very
heavy
massive,
kind of door, very massive door.
Yeah, it looks centuries
and that's
old.
authentic, right? I mean, this is probably authentic.
If you have a look around, we are not able to trace it back to medieval times.
The window and the stone, allegedly, from the Huss's prison in the monastery, Dominican monastery in Constance.
Yeah.
And they were shown. We don't know.
In the 19th century, one monastery was sort of turned over into a secular building. They found a wooden cage, and then they assumed this must have been the prison of Jan Hus during the time, centuries before that. Here you can see the massive door. They measured this wooden cage, so it was 6 foot high. If you imagine 1 foot is around 30 centimeters, that would make 1 meter 80 in height. It was 7 foot long, so 2 meters 10 length, but only a little bit more than 2 feet in width, so 84 centimeters. So if Jan Hus would have been imprisoned behind the door, he would not have been able to stretch his arms apart from the lengthwise. It is plausible to think that he was also chained always on his arms and his legs, because for contemporaries he was a heretic and thus possessed by the devil, and someone therefore needs to be chained. And he was here from December until March. So Constance, it's not charming over that time, So we rely on tourism. It's a lovely city when the weather is nice, but when you are very close during winter time, he was really close to the seaside. So it's very wet, it's very dark, You
say seaside, you mean to the lakeside?
To the lakeside,
I'm sorry. To the lakeside,
yes. He became very ill. He must have been placed somewhere very close to where the sewage was stored. So terrible,
very unhygienic.
So he became very ill.
Very damp.
And he was always waiting that King Sigismund would give him a possibility to speak in front of the council, because he had guaranteed that to him. And then something really peculiar happened here at the city of Constance. So here you can see on the 6th of April in 1415 a decree was issued. It's called Haec Sancta. And with this decree, the council declared itself as the highest authority, even higher than the Pope. And thus it was able to dispose of the popes. So this was a necessity to solve the papal schism. But for only one of the popes came here. This was Pope John the 23rd. And he then flew because that the same could happen to him like it happened to Jan Hus. That he would also be incarcerated. And Jan Hus had the hope that, when the Pope is no longer present, that he has now a possibility to finally speak in front of the council. But instead, he was just transferred to the bishop's castle in Gottlieben. It's still privately owned. And there he was imprisoned for another 2 months. And there's also a wooden cage, and what I find particularly interesting, it still exists. Yeah, it is privately owned. Czech people have already been there in the 19th century to visit it, but yeah, it is not open to the public, unfortunately. It has changed now ownership. Maybe we are in future allowed to have
But I think even when he was imprisoned already here in Constance, some of his friends could visit him from time to time, no? Or they were trying to help him. They were definitely in the city, but they couldn't.
Yeah, so for example, the knight, he was speaking to the king and saying, yeah, you've not kept your promise. So yeah, and he was able to write letters to his friends. Yeah, so that was allowed
He was allowed to contact, basically.
Yeah, so he was still allowed to contact. So here we have a recollection of his letters, so which give us a detailed insight to what his feelings were. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but only the church trials started at the start of June, and thus Jan Hus had to be present in these church trials. And then he came to his third and final prison. It was the Franciscan monastery here. It's not far from here. Nowadays it's a school. And he was also imprisoned there in a tower, very close to the medieval city wall. And what I find particularly sad is he was not very far imprisoned to where Jerome of Prague had been imprisoned. So only a few hundred meters, because what usually happens and what has also happened to us right now is we have unfortunately a little bit forgotten of Jerome of Prague. But his history, of course, should also be told here. So he came a little bit later here to Constance. Start of April in 1415 he came here. But at that time, as you know, Jan Hus had already been imprisoned. And so the same would have probably happened also to Jerome of Prague, because there were some anathemas spoken upon him for his defense of John Wycliffe. So he was leaving the city again for Überlingen. And he, where is it? He wanted to return back to Bohemia.
But he was not allowed anymore.
No, he was already in Hirschau, so quite far in Bavaria. And he was staying there something overnight and making some sarcastic comments with respect to the council, naming it the school of Satan himself, and by supporting Jan Hus' immaculateness. But this is where local authorities became unfortunately unaware of him, and thus they recognized, this is Jerome of Prague, someone against whom church trials are active. And then unfortunately they arrested him and brought him in chains here to Constance. And he was in a prison also on the medieval city wall, and maybe, I don't know, 500, 600 meters they were apart, and they did not know it. They were both imprisoned under very hard circumstances. And that I find particularly sad. Jan Hus, he was allowed 3 times to speak in front of the council to defend himself. Maybe you know, there were several reasons for him to not recount. So, for example, he writes, "In prison no one shouted at me as here at the council meeting where I cannot hear myself speak. I expected a more civilized behavior, more civilized handling on the part of the council." Or, for example, he writes in another letter, they made accusations against him from works he had not written himself. He said, why should I defend myself against something which I have not written? This does not make any sense. So,
So the council was basically very...
They did not want to burn him. They did not want to make him like a martyr, that he becomes a symbol for the Bohemian Reformation movement. But, for example, here you can also see how the attitude of King Sigismund changed. So I think that this is very interesting for your listeners. Jan Hus, I gave you the letter of safe contact for the journey to Constance, but I will not defend a heretic before the council. Submit to the mercy of the council. otherwise I will gladly attend your burning. This is written by King Sigismund, so you can see how his perspective changed towards Jan Hus. I think King Sigismund, he had other priorities. For him, the main priority was that the papal schism is resolved here.
Why is it important to have a place like this, the Hus House, here in Constance?
I think Jan Hus is a very important figure for social courage. Someone who was willing to die for his principles and who did come here, who had no evil intentions, who wanted here to help reform the church and also the society. He just wanted the society and the church to live a better life. He did not want any church division at all. And so some of his teachings, I think they are still attractive to us nowadays. To live a modest life, but especially that he was here and prepared really to suffer a horrible death for his principles. I think that is something to look up to.
So that was Alexander Perschel, director of the Jan Hus Museum in Constance, Germany. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Czechast. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the life and legacy of Jan Hus. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe or follow Czechast so you won't miss any future episodes. And if you have any thoughts, questions or ideas for future topics, please feel free to reach out. You can email me at english@radio.cz or connect on Facebook or X. Once again, I'm Vít Pohanka, your host. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to sharing more stories about all things Czech with you soon. Until then, take care and stay curious.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.